Ilias Kadir let the blade whisper through bluefin, shaving petals for the first tray. From the reflection in the knife, he watched the ballroom doors as if they were another set of eyes. 3 men in staff black crossed the marble late, not matching the rhythm of the crew he'd trained himself to ignore. The first wore new shoes that hadn't learned the floor, the second kept his left hand free, the third smiled without creasing his eyes. He shifted one step so the friar's hiss masked the soft click of a safety being eased off somewhere beyond the pass. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. He plated the tuna as if nothing were wrong, ginger, lime, 2 grains of smoked salt, and counted breaths. The room beyond the swing door was a lake of sequins and money, the Gala throne for a new battery that promised to store sunlight like grain. Leora Vance, the CEO whose name turned markets, moved through the brightness like a current, tall, precise, a navy silk dress that refused to apologize for seriousness. Ilias had watched her on screens for a year and a half while living under a name that belonged to nobody, but tonight he watched her with his own eyes through steel and steam and the glare of heat lamps. He made the barest sign with his wrist to the pastry lead, an old kitchen dialect that meant, slow the line by 45 seconds. He didn't have 45 seconds to spare, he needed them. The 3 men went separate ways. New Shoes took the service corridor where the lighting flickered and staff walked with the tunnel vision of people who owed favors to rent. Left hand drifted toward the AV booth which sat like a quiet confession at the edge of the stage. Milk Eyes paused near the florals to smell peonies like a man performing humanity for a camera nobody else could see. Ilias set down the Anajiba and switched to a shorter petty knife he'd modified years ago with a ridge ground into the spine, traction against bone if he ever needed it, which he always hoped he wouldn't. A runner skated by with a rack of champagne coupes. "Chef, table 16 needs vegan now," the kid said, voice high with the helium of urgency. "Tell them the garden grows in 5, Ilias answered, gentle, and angled his body to see both corridors at once. He could feel his hands wanting to shake and made them hungry instead. It was a trick he'd learned on nights when hunger and fear looked like the same animal. The first problem arrived as a smell. Burned dust. Service corridor lights coughing out gray. New Shoes again, moving like a man whose weight belonged to something metallic concealed in his jacket's drape. Ilias slid the petty knife under the counter lip and palmed a steel skewer, the kind used to test cakes. The pastry lead's eyes widened. She opened her mouth. He shook his head once, a movement as small as a touch. He stepped into the corridor carrying 2 trays as if late for a plating call. New Shoes put his shoulder to him. "Kitchen's hot, friend," Ilias said, turning just enough that the trays scraped metal and flashed distraction. He dropped one tray by accident on purpose. It made a crash that drew 2 dishwashers forward and 1 server back. New Shoes reached to steady him. Ilias let the man's hand land. A half-second of contact was all he needed. Knuckles that belonged to a trigger more than a ladle, a flat of palm scored by unfamiliar work, no callus in the spot where a career server wore their weight. "Wrong door," Ilias told him softly, and drove the skewer into the seam between 2 ribs, not to puncture a lung, not yet, to make the arm stutter and the grip break. He twisted the man by the lapels and used the drop tray as a shield to absorb the sound of a suppressed shot that thudded into aluminum like a fist into a pillow. The dishwashers screamed. One ran, the other froze. "Out," Ilias ordered, not raising his voice. The freezer door was 1.5 meters to his right. He had spent 3 days making sure it stuck. He threw New Shoes into it with his left shoulder, kicked the jam, and let the man careen against blast-chilled steel. The second shot ricocheted off the tray into the doorframe. "Sparks!" Shouted questions somewhere beyond. "Tell security the ice machine exploded," he said to the frozen dishwasher, "because if you gave people a line and a job they remembered how to move." The kid nodded and ran like running was a paycheck. New Shoes came at him with a knife that hadn't tasted onions. Ilias met the blade with the tray again, let the metal ring, then stepped inside the arc, pinned the wrist with his elbow, and used his body like a hinge to send the knife clattering. He could feel the man's breath on his cheek, mint that didn't come from staff coffee, the expensive kinda handler gave you so your breath said you'd been somewhere else. He kneed the man in the thigh where nerves lit like down wires, then clipped him behind the ear with the ridge of the petty knife's spine. The man folded exactly the way physics said he would. A breath. 2. He pressed the petty knifes flat to the man's carotid and counted to 5 so his pulse settled under the count. He'd promised himself a rule, no death if he could take information. He patted the man down with the speed of a man who had done this in narrow rooms and wide deserts. The suppressor was printed composite. The pistol, polymer, unregistered. The earpiece whispered a language that had been cleaned of accent, the way rich people cleaned houses, so well you forgot someone lived there. He took the battery, the gun's magazine, the earpiece. In the jacket's inner pocket he found a card that was not a card, thin ceramic with a silver line through it like lightning captured and made to lie flat. He glanced at the symbol etched near the edge, a swallow with its wings half folded, a mark he had seen once in a report delivered to a room where nobody used names. He should have felt vindication. He felt time burning instead. The Gala beyond the swing door laughed at a joke delivered by a man who had paid to laugh at his own jokes. Ilias placed New Shoe's limp body behind the freezer stacks where a bag of frozen berries owned a gravity that would not be argued with, then pulled the freezer door shut. He slid the skewer in to wedge it without looking as if he cared what happened next. Back to the line. Tuna. Ginger. Lime. Salt. Lift. His wrist moved like the world was normal. He let his breath use the length of the aisle, long in, longer out. He listened for left hand. The AV booth coughed at that exact moment, the house lights shifting, music hiccuping in a way only a man trying to plant a packet would approve. Ilias pivoted to the pastry lead. "Take fish 2 and 3, he said. "Tell Goma to walk the garden early." "You got it," she said, and the phrase meant, "I don't know what you're doing but I trust you over chaos." He left the pass, took a server's tray, and walked into the ballroom like a moving piece of furniture nobody noticed until it wasn't where it had always been. Left hand stood in the shadow of the AV rack pretending his left hand was casual. The rack's door was ajar in a way that said intention, not negligence. Ilias placed his tray on a high top and stepped closer, a smile rehearsed for years in mirrors where he practiced belonging. "Hot hors d'oeuvre," he said to 3 donors who had arrived to be congratulated for existing. They bent their mouths to bite miniature empanadas. He used their circle like cover and drifted behind it to the rack. "Sir," Ilias said to Left Hand, "we ask guests to avoid this area for." Left Hand's eyes flicked to his. That was the moment. "You only ever get one." Ilias caught his left wrist, felt the tension that said trigger discipline. He rotated the joint and thumbed the man's fingers across the safety of a device that wasn't a gun. The packet already sat on the 3rd shelf, taped under an HDMI splitter. Left Hand tried to stomp his instep. Ilias moved his foot. The stomp found carpet. The Gala's screen flashed the Vance Energy logo and a sun rising over a grid like a prayer. Ilias bumped the AV rack door with his hip and said "excuse me" as if he had bumped a person. He rolled the man's wrist through a joint lock disguised as an apology. The packet fell loose in its tape cradle. He caught it with the cloth napkin tucked at his waist. "I know you," Left Hand hissed back in a voice that didn't belong to anyone here. "Knife tests in Karachi. Ghost process in." "Not tonight," Ilias said, and changed the angle of the wrist so that pain said compliance louder than a command could. He dragged the man 2 steps behind the drape and introduced his sternum to the metal brace of the lighting truss. It wasn't elegant. It didn't need to be. The man's breath left with a sound that tried to be a word and failed. Ilias shoved him onto a chair, cuffed him with a zip tie he carried for sacks of carrots, and showed him the packet. "What is it?" Ilias asked. Left Hand swallowed and tried to spit laughter around the swallow. "Insurance." "Against?" Her speech going long. Ilias peeled the tape. Inside sat a wafer of thin explosive seated with a coin PCB waiting for a handshake from a signal that could be anywhere someone rich believed in invisibility. He held it like it was a fragile dessert and felt his throat go cold. This was not personal assassination. This was audience, public theater. Whoever planned this wanted the company to bleed in front of donors. He slid the wafer into a bread roll on his tray, chose a seat where a man was bragging about yachts, and set the roll next to his plate with the same courtesy he used for everyone else. 4 minutes. He had to buy Leora 4 minutes. He returned to the AV booth and bent to left hand as if checking his respirations. How many? Left hand looked past him like help would bloom there. 3, he said. 3 cuts. 3 heads. Where? Kitchen. AV, balcony. No crease eyes. Florals wasn't florals after all. Balcony had line of sight over the stage where Leora had begun to speak into a silence that leaned forward. Ilias looked at her and the crowd fell away. He heard her voice through the speakers the way you hear your name in a city, not loud, just accurate. We built this battery to keep certain endings from happening, she said. He remembered the interview from 6 months ago when she'd said the same sentence to a journalist who kept asking whether she worried about geopolitics. We built it so light could wait. He left the AV booth and entered the corridor again where the florals towered like polite jungles. No crease eyes stepped out with a florist's knife and a box cutter like a man who believed fairs were won with paper cuts. The smile reached nowhere. You're not on the sheet, Ilias said. I'm everywhere, the man answered, the worst kind of truth. He lunged for the artery in Ilias's thigh. The world shrank to angles and force. Ilias brought his knee up, let steel skim denim, and rammed the florist into a stair rail. The box cutter nicked his apron and bit the wooden handrail instead. He used the petty knife's ridge to strip the man's grip back from his own wrist and then, because the corridor was narrow, he let the wall be his partner. The man's head met it twice, a wretched percussion. The body tried to continue, the brain had already forgotten. He tied him with the other carrot zip tie and listened. He could hear a woman cry laugh on the ballroom floor at a table where money made people believe they were indestructible. He wanted to live where people thought that and it wasn't dangerous. Time bent toward the balcony. He took the service stairs 2 at a time and came out into purple light where donors drifted like slow comets. The balcony's rail overlooked the stage and the CEO who spoke in sentences that didn't waste oxygen. He scanned for heat in the wrong places, the odd stillness, the breath that didn't match the music's tempo. He found her by what didn't move. The third assassin wasn't a man. She wore a catering black dress and the air of someone who could apologize while breaking you. The case at her feet looked like it held a camera lens. It held a breakdown rifle whose parts clicked together like a conversation you didn't know you were in until you were already committed. Ilias walked toward her with a tray afloat on his palms. She turned her head and her eyes were not a waiter's. They were a memory of a mountain range that never forgave travelers. Canapes, he said. She smiled like a language. You're late. What do I owe you? 3 minutes, she said. And a name. She had seen him in the corridor or she had seen him somewhere that wasn't here. The rifle's parts married each other with intimate sounds. He set the tray down on a cocktail table and lifted a napkin to show an empty plate. She barely glanced, professionals trusted the story they were telling themselves. He moved when her eyes dipped to align the last piece. He stepped inside the barrel, outside her shoulders, and let his right forearm knock the rifle's mouth toward the ceiling where plaster ate the round. His left hand found the case and kicked it backward, over the rail, toward the plants on the floor below. Her knee came up. He absorbed the hit on his thigh where he could afford bruises. She cut at his cheek with a razor hidden in her sleeve hem. He turned, let it shave hair instead of skin, and caught her wrist. The razor clinked to the carpet. For a second they hung inside a bubble blown by adrenaline where everything was bright and slow. The ballroom's speakers carried Leora's voice like a calm river. We are not selling a battery, Leora said. We are selling time, time that belongs to families who lose it when lights go out. The woman tried to bite him. He laughed once before he remembered he didn't do that anymore. He slammed her wrist to the rail and extracted the other razor from the other sleeve before it woke. She pivoted, used his weight to turn, and tried to throw him. He let her, because letting was sometimes winning. He rolled, caught the rail, and turned his fall into a return to his feet. She snatched for the tray and hurled it at his face. He snatched it back out of the air, let it slap his palm, and spun it so its edge kissed her knuckles. She hissed air, first sound she'd made that wasn't language, and stepped back. He took the petty knife from his apron. She looked almost insulted. "You brought a kitchen tool to a contract," she said. He lifted the knife so the lights caught the ridge he'd ground into its spine years ago. "It's enough," he said. "For you." He gave himself to mechanics. She attacked low. He cut the tendon in the top of her forearm, clean, a mercy that ended the grip of a gun she didn't have time to reach. She swung at his ear. He ducked and let the swing pass into emptiness so momentum became a lie. He tapped her knee with the tray's edge where bone and pride were closest friends. She collapsed onto the rail the way people do when physics remembers them. He took her by the collar and murmured so only she would hear, "Pull back and live." "Not my contract," she said, and went for his eyes with fingers that had been nails once and then learned to become something else. He didn't want to blind her, and that slowed him a sliver. She used the sliver to reach a third razor from a place he hadn't planned for, the ankle cuff. He cursed himself and caught her foot before the blade learned him. Their faces were so close he could see the echo of a scar across her upper lip, old, neat, someone's initials cut there years ago. The letter could have been an A or a V, depending on how you wanted to remember it. He turned her ankle, not to break, to threaten. She let the blade go. He kicked it under a chair. She spat in his face, a last resort that tasted like iron. He wiped it with the back of his hand so it didn't blind him and finished it, fast, 2 blows, one to float her attention, another to put her to sleep without asking permission. He let her down against the wall and knelt to breathe. His body vibrated with the bass of a song he couldn't hear. He looked at the stage. Leora stood without notes. He had never met someone who trusted silence so much. It made him want to live through tonight in a way that felt almost unreasonable. "Mr. Kadir." He turned. The head of venue security, Mesa Korolev, had come up the stairs without making ear move. She wore a comms bud and a face that made crisis look like a day off. 2 of her team fanned behind her with that tightness around the eyes that meant they had a report but were afraid of their own report. "You're not on my kitchen list," Mesa said. Short-staffed, Ilias answered, because a lie wrapped in a truth could pass any inspection once. Mesa flicked a glance at the woman on the floor and then at Ilias's hands. "This all you?" "I had help," he said, tilting his chin toward the music where 100 strangers had done a decent job of not dying. She snorted. "Cute. You bleeding?" He touched his cheek. It came away with a line of red that would look dramatic in a bathroom later. "Not enough to file paperwork." "Good," Mesa said. "Because I have a donor who collapses when she sees blood and a CEO who hates whispers more than bullets. Can you move?" "Where?" "Behind the stage." He went. He went because the only place worse than behind the stage was not behind it. He carried the case with the rifle parts and tucked it into a shadow only he would remember. On the stairs down, the world tilted. He had been running on methods and nerve. The nerve asked a question about tomorrow. He didn't answer it. Backstage was a maze of rigging and taped marks and people whose jobs had always been to make other people look like miracles. Mesa's team peeled off to collect the woman from the balcony. Ilias followed the taped excess to a curtain where, if he stood at a certain angle, he could see Leora in the gap between black and light. "And we've chosen to license this technology to municipalities first," she was saying, "because there are children who read by bathroom light in kitchens that go dark at 9 p.m. He realized he was smiling like an idiot and made his mouth behave. Mesa stood next to him with her arms crossed, eyes on Leora like a bodyguard who auditioned for the job and then never left the stage. "We found 2 more, Mesa murmured, voice so low it wouldn't disturb dust. One in a freezer, one loving the AV rack like it was his mother." "You put them there?" "I put them there," Ilias said. "Who are you?" Just kitchen. And I'm just a florist, Mesa said. Then, very quietly, do I need to pull her? He watched Leora's throat move as she swallowed the end of a paragraph that had come from her bones. Not yet, he said. They built a story that needs a third act. I think we cancelled it. Mesa's calm ticked. A voice spoke in her ear. She listened, nodded once. We recovered a ceramic card with a swallow engraving, she said. You ever see that? Ilias felt the skin over his ribs go tight. Once, he said. You want to tell me where? In a briefing nobody was supposed to remember. Mesa looked at him long enough to tell him that patience had a weight limit. There's another problem, she said. Our internal head count is wrong by 1. Somebody on Leora's personal staff clocked in twice without clocking out. He didn't swear out loud. He swore in a language that didn't need sound. Which name? Hale. The name hit like an old bruise finding the table's corner. Hale had not been a person, Hale had been a program, a set of methods and an insult. He had ended Hale before he left that life. Or he had been told he had ended Hale. Either their ghost had grown a new body or someone had bought the label and pressed it onto a new face. Ilias looked at Leora again, now closing with thanks. The room rose to its feet as if manners were a moral stance. He thought of the wafer and the bread roll near the braggart and of a radio handshake that hadn't arrived yet. A plan with multiple triggers was the kind you didn't applaud near. Mesa, he said, we need to clear a path to the kitchens. Now. To hide you? To keep her alive. You think she's safer near knives? She's safer near me. It was an arrogant sentence. It was also accurate. Mesa studied his face for lies and found only the ones he lived with. All right, she said. I'll bring her the long way. You? I go ahead and make the corridor honest. He moved. Back into the dark, into the service spine where buildings kept their bones. He ghosted along tiles that had learned to squeak when they needed attention. He made the ice machine leak loudly so it would sing security a plausible song. He placed the bread roll in the mop sink and turned the tap so water began to swell it into a ruined thing that would never sing for any radio. It felt like drowning something that wanted to be fire. He tasted copper and realized he had bitten his tongue. He spat pink into a towel and made the world straight in his head. The freezer door would still be wedged. The AV booth would still be a coward's altar. The balcony would still be purple with open bar money. He moved the way a person moves who is almost done but not allowed to be yet. When he turned the last corner, 2 men in venue blacks were already there. They weren't his. They looked like a piece of scenery that didn't belong in this play. He didn't ask questions because men like that used questions the way traps use cheese. He hit the nearer one with a pan he'd lifted from a rack, iron that made decades sound like one note, then slipped inside the other's punch and ruined his shoulder with a motion that felt like snapping a dry branch. He chained them with their own belts and rolled them under a folding table where loneliness would keep them quiet. He exhaled once, long enough to teach his nerves that oxygen existed. Then he heard footsteps that didn't try to hide and turned to meet them. Leora appeared in the corridor with Mesa at her shoulder and 2 security behind. Up close, she was both exactly and nothing like the woman on magazine covers. The jaw that said she had argued with people who owned countries, the eyes that said she could laugh and mend it. She took in the 2 sleeping men under the table, the line of blood on his cheek, the desire he had to be anywhere but under her gaze, and she did something he had not prepared for. She smiled like a recognition. You cooked, she said. I plated, he said. People don't applaud plating, she said, and offered him her hand like a door. He didn't take it. He couldn't. If he touched her, the part of him that didn't have a name would make a mistake. Ms. Vance, Mesa cut in, this is the person who has been saving your donors from a very bad review, Ilias said quickly, because the truth was a luxury they would spend later, if later existed. Leora's smile thinned but didn't die. Do I get your name? She asked. Ilias, he said. The lie after it was supposed to come. He didn't let it. Kadir. Mesa's eyes snapped at him like magnets had been installed behind them. Leora's did not. She kept hers on his hands, the calluses where a chef kept them, and the other set where a different life had left its proof. He saw the instant she noticed both, and the instant after when she decided what to do with the knowledge. "Walk with me, Mr. Kadir," she said, and started down the corridor like a woman who believed in gravity but expected to be the exception. He walked. Because he had already made the choice the day he filled out a fake HR form to join a catering temp agency that never checked references so long as your knife cut true and you showed up to move heavy things. They passed the ice machine singing its lie and the mop sink where the bread roll had drowned. Leora didn't ask. He liked her more for that. Mesa took point with 2 security, eyes making a map of every mistake the building could make. "Someone bought the Swallow," he said quietly to Leora, as if they were discussing a wine pairing. "Someone?" she asked. "Someone who thinks branding is power," he said. "Someone who wants you to look at a symbol and see inevitability." "And what do you see?" "A budget," he said. "And a deadline." Her mouth tilted. "You think in schedules." "I used to," he said. "I think in exits now." "Do I need one?" "You need 3. They reached the swing door to the kitchen. It breathed out heat and garlic and 10 different kinds of relief. The staff stopped what they were doing without meaning to. People always stopped when someone important walked through, they just didn't always know why they had stopped. "Everyone's fine," Ilias said to them, and the kitchen as a single animal took that sentence and let it lower their shoulders by a centimeter. The pastry lead looked at him with a question in her mouth he promised he would answer if they both got to a day with slow hours. Mesa's comm ticked again. She touched it. "Say it," she told the voice. In the half-second before the voice came through, Ilias watched Leora touch the stainless of the prep table like it was a thing that had served her well for 10 years. A person who touched steel like that had not forgotten where anything came from. Mesa listened, then said a word Ilias hadn't heard in a year. "Hail." He didn't have to ask. He knew. Hail was here. Not a program. A person wearing its name because some contracts love theater. "Where?" Ilias asked. Mesa's eyes met his. "Office level." "Of course." The office level held the safe where the night's donors had promised to lock their phones, the PI server that carried live telemetry for the light show, the little windowless room where venue managers went to cry when schedules failed. It held one more thing, the emergency cutoff for the stage rig. "Don't pull the fire alarm," Ilias said. Mesa blinked. "Why not?" "Because fire alarms pull people into hallways," he said. "And Hale loves hallways." Leora watched them like a mathematician being told a proof in a language she didn't speak. She looked back to Ilias. "You know this person." "I know what they were," he said. "And what were you?" she asked. He opened his mouth. Closed it. This was not the time. This was never the time, and yet it had arrived like a bill. He took a breath that went too far down and burned coming back up. "If you come with me, I can keep you alive," he said. "If you don't, I can keep your company alive." "Both," she said. He shook his head once. "For the next 10 minutes, those are separate projects." Her eyes did a calculation in the air between them. He could feel it like gravity recalibrating. Mesa was already assigning people to doors with her eyes. "Choose," Ilias said, hating himself. "Company," Leora said. He nodded, because he had known she would, and because part of him needed her to be that person. "Then you go with Mesa to the server room," he said. "I'll make the hallway impossible." "How?" Mesa asked. "With kitchen," he said, and lifted a crate of oil as if he had been born to lift crates of oil. Leora touched his sleeve. It was not a plea. It was a half-remembered recognition she hadn't earned yet. "Who are you?" she asked. He looked at her hand like it was the first true thing he'd seen that night. He had planned another month of anonymity, another year if he could steal it. That plan had died the moment the men with the wrong rhythm crossed the marble floor. He set the oil down very carefully and reached under his jacket for the lanyard nobody at the temp agency had ever asked to see. The badge on it was matte black and blank to most light. But at the edge of the kitchen's harsh fluorescence, the surface caught fire with a faint etched symbol, a circle broken by a single vertical stroke. Leora stepped closer. Her eyes widened by a degree only careful people notice. "That mark," she began, then stopped, because to speak it would be to make it a thing this room would have to carry. "It was never printed," he said. "It was burned." "By who?" she asked, but the question wasn't really a question. It was a past returning. He met her eyes and decided to pay what the night demanded. "By your father," he said. "On the day he..." This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. "Shut it all down." The words landed between them like a dropped pan, loud enough that the kitchen seemed to tilt toward the sound. Leora's hand left his sleeve as if the steel beneath had startled her. Mesa's gaze cut from the blank, burned badge to Ilias's face, trying to decide whether the new knowledge made him safer or more dangerous. "What did he shut down?" Leora asked, voice steady only because it had learned steadiness in rooms that punished other choices. "The unit that made me a habit," Ilias said. "The one that listened when the world tried to tell your father he wasn't allowed to build things that worked." "Later," Mesa said, because the corridor had no later to spare. "Office level." "Hail." Ilias shouldered the crate of oil again and let the weight force his mind back to the hallway. He glanced once at Leora. In her eyes he saw the outline of 100 questions she had never been permitted to ask. He wanted to answer all of them with the kind of honesty that doesn't need air. The night refused him, as nights like this always did. "Stay behind Mesa," he told her. "If anything feels wrong, trust the feeling in the woman in front of you." "That's a lot of trust for 2 sentences," Leora said. "Your father hired me to be economical," he answered, then turned the corner before the ache in her mouth could become a shape he'd carry. He sprinted the service spine toward the office level, feeling the familiar calculation lace up his muscles. Distance. Visibility. Cover. The industrial tiles surrendered an army of tiny squeaks. He memorized each one. On the way, he built a hallway out of kitchen. He unscrewed the cap on the first jug of oil and poured a dark river along the middle stretch, thinning it with a splash of water from a Cambro so it would sit on the tile like deceit. He feathered flour across the last 3 meters, a ghost white warning that would become a signal when disturbed. He set rolling racks at offset angles, not enough to look like barricades, enough to make a straight walk crooked. He wedged the iron pan he'd carried into the hinge gap of a side door to make it shriek if someone tried to bring a crowd. A prep cook rounded the corner, eyes wide, and stopped dead. "Chef. Take the staff stairs and wait in the loading bay," Ilias said. "Tell anyone you see to do the same. Walk, don't run. Smile if someone important is watching." "What do I tell them?" "That the salmon's resting," he said, and the line cook had spent enough life in restaurants to understand that line meant everything and nothing in obedience right now. At the T-junction before the office level, he paused to listen to the building. Buildings talk if you stand still long enough. He heard the faint, happy moan of a dishwasher he'd left running, the bass thump feeding the ballroom a heartbeat it believed was its own, and, there, the stealthy hush of shoes refusing to squeak. The kind that came with work that paid you to never arrive. 2, he decided. No, 3. He set a stainless mixing bowl on the oiled stretch like a silver water lily and stepped back into shadow, petty knife in his palm, tray on his forearm as if he'd simply taken a wrong turn carrying appetizers to a VIP who preferred to be near doors. He kept his spine long the way he had trained it on ranges and in rooms without windows, the posture that tells a watching gun you intend to live and have practiced doing so. The first shadow turned the corner with the caution of a man who believed in traps because he had laid some. He saw the flower first, halted, and gestured to the man behind him. They murmured to each other with little head movements that were their own language. The third man, bored of waiting, stepped forward. His shoes slid on oil. He grabbed the leading man's shoulder. They pinwheeled into the rolling rack and found gravity the old-fashioned way. The stainless bowl skipped across the tile with a noise like a bell waking up. Ilias moved, tray first. The bored one came up reaching for a gun that lived cross-draw. The tray met his face with a sound like a new punctuation mark. His head banged the rack again. He folded, hands forgetting their mission. The leading man dove low, smart, trying to get under the oil. Ilias let him, then trapped his head between the tray's rim and the floor, and pressed until the fight turned to breath. The second man, the cautious one, ignored both and tried to dance along the narrow dry edge like a wire walker. He would have made it if the iron pan hadn't shrieked at the side door and stolen the exact second he needed to keep balance. Ilias took that second in someone else's shoulder and gave them to physics. The cautious man took the oil like a sea and nearly surfed it into the wall. Nearly. Ilias met him there with the petty knife in his forearm and the way you talk to someone's wrist when you need them to stop having plans. "Where's Hale?" he asked, voice small and close. The cautious man tried to speak with a jaw that had forgotten letters. "You're late," he managed. "Story of my life," Ilias said, and buried the man's hands under a chair leg he didn't have time to regret. He stepped through the flour, 3 prints in chalk, his own, and reached the office-level door. He spent a heartbeat on the hinge sound and another on the air that came through the crack. Cold, recycled, colonized by electronics. No human breath on it yet. He opened and entered. The office level had been designed by an architect who believed that glass and success belonged together. Glass-walled offices hummed with empty light. A shared work area sat with its long table stripped clean, save for a cut pile rug and a glass carafe of water poised like self-control. The safe room door at the far end waited with its keypad anointed in greasy fingerprints left by 100 donors and interns and one manager who cried here last month alone. He felt rather than saw the lens in the corner turn toward him. Hale was watching. Good. He preferred enemies who wanted credit. He walked to the safe room, fingers loose, everything about him saying I am kitchen and this is a mistake and don't look at me if your story requires me to be important. He pressed his ear to the door and heard nothing but the ocean of building. The vending machine by the copier blinked silently, a red 88 that told the inside world it was alive. He took a quarter from his pocket and fed the machine. It ate the coin and did nothing because machines love to show you who they are. He pressed C2. He waited. When the spiral refused to turn, he hit the left side of the machine exactly where the panel was least proud of itself. The machine, like people, responded to knowing hands. A bag of pretzels dropped. He didn't want pretzels. He wanted attention. The lens in the corner blinked, no, not blinked, shifted, the slight tremor cameras make when a man behind them leans closer. Hale, Ilias said to the room, to the lens, to the air. You're boring me. The intercom above the copier woke with a bee-sting buzz. A voice came through it wearing a smile and had stolen from a hospital. Knife, it said. Ilias delivered the smallest, most tired smile in the world. You always did prefer other people's names for me. They're more accurate, Hale said. And more poetic. How long did you think you could slice carrots and call that a life? I like carrots, Ilias said. They don't lie. You never liked anything that couldn't bleed, the voice replied, amused. And you always loved a stage. So here we are, a nice clean one. Ilias turned to show the camera his profile like a man putting on a tie. The swallow, he asked. A hobby, Hale said. Men with money love hobbies. We shape them something to believe in hard enough that they forget to ask who it is they are saving. You bought the mark, Ilias said. I licensed it, Hale corrected, and the smugness told Ilias everything he needed to know about who signed checks and who endorsed them. Brand recognition has value. No point in letting history rot in old reports. Besides, a pause, a smile, needed an audience. Ilias glanced toward the stair door where Mesa and Leora would appear in 30, maybe 40 seconds. You tried to kill her on a stage, he said. What exactly do you think you're selling? Fear, Hale said. And a narrative. You know better than anyone how much stories pay, Knife. I'm not Knife anymore, Ilias said. I'm Kitchen. Then cook me something, Hale purred. Start with yourself. The vending machine whirred. Ilias looked at it with the loathing of a man who has never once wanted a chalky chocolate bar. The spiral turned without being asked. Then the floor under the machine thunked. Ah. Plate charge, small, local, the kind of blast that breaks kneecaps without asking permission from the rest of your day. He stepped sideways into the doorway of a glass office before the charge went. It went like a cough with a bad childhood. The vending machine leaped and crashed down 6 inches to the left, glass frothing outward in a glittering hiss. The nearest glass wall spiderwebbed from a single trembling point. Ilias's ears rang the old song that always wants to become memory and never quite manages. He tasted metal. He moved. Hale loved hallways. Ilias refused to offer one. He broke the nearest glass wall with the stool by the long table, stepped through into a narrow private office, and crossed to the next pane, already seeking alternative lines of travel the way a cook looks for substitute ingredients when the order's on the rail and the delivery truck is late. He made a new doorway with the stool before the second charge went off beneath the copier. The world schooled his teeth with grit. He reached the safe room, covering the keypad with his body while he keyed in the default code nobody had changed because donors in emergencies dislike friction. The light turned green like a petty reward. He cracked the door, just enough to see the bank of monitors inside and the little utilitarian bench where a single human being could sit and make bad decisions feel necessary. Hale was not there. Of course not. The safe room was the decoy. The real theater had a better view. The intercom spoke again. If you had ever wanted a door open in your life, knife, Hale said softly, you would have learned to ask. Ilias leaned into the intercom with the affection you give a skillet. Every door I ever needed opened, I cooked. He left the safe room door cracked and slipped into the server closet across the hall, where heat lived like a stubborn tenant. He cut the zip ties on a coil of patch cables and let them fall like bright noodles across the floor. He found the emergency rigging cutoff key on the wall, red as a heart, and pocketed it because there are some colors you don't leave lonely. On the floor, a smear of shoe rubber declared that someone with fast feet had already been here. The smear went toward the stair to the catwalk above the stage. Hale loved catwalks the way other men loved mirrors, high, exposed, and flattering if you forgot about gravity. Ilias took the stair 2 at a time. Heat wrapped his ribs. Below, the Gala still glowed, ignorant of the way its bones hummed. Leora, Mesa, and 2 security came into the office level as he left it, Mesa reading the floor like a book open to a chapter labeled mistake. He pointed at the server closet. Mesa nodded, Leora followed. Good. He trusted her to keep the company breathing while he went after the throat that wanted air. The catwalk swallowed him into a dark that smelled like dust and old light. The rigging hung like a city map in negative, ropes and cables and the heavy promise of things that would fall if asked. He moved silent, shoes choosing only the bolts that wouldn't sing. He could feel Hale up there the way you can feel a storm where the air has different opinions. Do you remember Karachi? Hale's voice floated from the black like a memory that dressed for dinner. When you told a boy to put down a knife and he told you to pick it up because he was tired of people who didn't want to look like what they were? I remember the boy, Ilias said. He put the knife down because someone finally called him by his real name. And what's yours? Not knife, he said again, and kept moving. The voice came from the left. He went right. He stopped where the catwalk widened at the light bay and let his breath become the building's breath so his chest wouldn't give him away. Hale laughed softly, close now. You never learn. Men like us are what we do. Change the word and you still have the deed. My deeds are dough and heat, Ilias said. And tonight? Tonight I'm making reductions, he said, and the petty knife in his palm flickered once where it stole light like a thief. A wire shifted above him. He dropped before his mind announced the movement. The thrown knife shaved the space his throat had just vacated and buried itself in a sandbag like a prudent regret. Ilias rolled, came up in a crouch, and took 2 quiet steps into the space the knife had made. Hale moved to meet what he believed he had made. Hale had a face you forget until it's the only one in a room. Not handsome. Not ugly. The kind of face you hire to be in pictures of nothing. He wore venue black and an expression he might have borrowed from someone who had just solved a crossword. There you are, Hale said. Here I am, Ilias agreed. They watched each other for a second that counted very fast. Below them, Leora's voice reached the end of its Q&A and the room applauded a woman who had not yet had time to be afraid. The sound shivered up the rigging and into the catwalk like an instruction to be alive. Do you know why I licensed the Swallow? Hale asked, conversational, stepping light. No. Because people don't understand systems, Hale said. They understand birds. You give them a bird and they forget the sky is made of wires. People like you make skies out of wire, Ilias said. People like her make light. And people like you make myths, Hale said. Let me help you make a new one. He moved first. Of course he did. Hale always moved first on paper. In life he preferred to watch. But tonight he had an audience beneath, and men who love audiences will always break character to be seen. He kicked for Ilias's knee and jabbed for his eye in the same breath, an unfair economy. Ilias blocked both with a tray that didn't exist, no tray up here, so he used his forearm and the knife's spine and a small certainty that bone is more honest than choreography. Hale's second strike met the petty knife and learned the shape of its ridge. He pulled back, bleeding and delighted. You brought a kitchen tool to a catwalk, he said, echoing the woman's earlier insult as if he had eaten it and decided it tasted good. Kitchen gets the job done, Ilias said, and gave him the pan he did carry up here after all, the iron one, retrieved from the hinge, its weight a sentence. He swung low, cracked Hale's shin, and used the grunt that followed to step inside. They grappled like old dogs who didn't yet know if they wanted to bite or remember being puppies. Hale went for eyes again, then changed midline to hips, trying to use leverage to send Ilias over the rail. Ilias turned with it, let the momentum carry him only as far as he could afford, then took it back with interest. His fingers found the emergency rigging key in his pocket and the word for it in his head grew bigger and bigger until it became action. He slammed the key into the lockbox on the catwalk rail and turned. Below them, the stage's motorized truss froze. Hale blinked, surprised, which was an error you only get once up here. Ilias hit him then, not hard, not soft, a truth told with the inside of a fist, and broke his rhythm. Hale stumbled against the safety line, arms windmilling in a large lie about control. He caught himself, of course he did. Men like him had been catching themselves in other people's lives for years. Move, he hissed, and the comm in his ear clicked twice, an old code for a plan B that had just grown legs. Somewhere below, something else began to happen, something he hadn't shown Ilias because Hale believed in overbooking. Ilias grabbed Hale's wrist, twisted, and took the little ceramic card with the swallow out of his hand like plucking an earring from someone asleep. Hale stared at his suddenly empty palm. You don't get to keep that, Ilias said. Neither do you, Hale said, and smiled as the room below made a new sound. Not applause. Not fear. The breath a crowd takes when a light becomes a shadow. Ilias looked down. On the stage, the giant screen behind Leora faltered and then rerouted to a feed that wasn't the demo. Numbers filled the wall like a blizzard, foreign accounts, wire confirmations, names of shell companies dressed in coastal weather and numbered streets. The title at the top had been hand-lettered by a man with too much time and a nice pen, Vance Energy, the secret budget. The crowd murmured in hunger. Scandal. The donors recoiled in slow, delicious horror. Leora stood in the wash of false numbers, tiny and very, very real. Hale whistled between his teeth, soft as a lullaby. You can stop a bullet, he said. Can you stop a story? Ilias's mouth went dry. He had no tray big enough for this one. But he had a woman who did not lie to glass or rooms or herself. Tell them it's false, he whispered to the air as if her ear lived in the ceiling. Don't argue. Show them. Leora did not look up as if the catwalk spoke. She looked down into the faces that would decide her and lifted her hand like calling class to attention. The murmurs thinned in the old reflex. She turned and read the first 3 lines aloud, then walked through the totals with the patience of a good teacher. Then she told them exactly what each number actually was: a municipal prepayment, an escrow bridge, a charitable reserve for an equatorial grid that would never pay for itself and didn't need to. She spoke without notes, because the truth does not require index cards. The crowd followed, unwilling at first, then grudging, then leaning forward because the math had been taught to them by wallets and now a person was making it human. Hale hissed in annoyance, a gas leak catching. "She's better than her father," he said. He would have yelled. "He taught her not to," Ilias said, and drove him back with a combination that tasted like regret. Hale fought dirty because cleanliness was for kitchens and courts. He headbutted. He heel-stomped. He bit. Ilias accepted it all without rancor. Pain had been his school, he had the degrees. He didn't try to kill Hale. He tried to end the evening. They went down together once, hard, the catwalk thrumming under their combined request to be the ground. Hale's fingers scrabbled for something to help and found a tool caddy strapped to the rail, wrenches, a box cutter, a small pry bar. His hand closed on the box cutter with a joy that felt personal. He slashed for Ilias's forearm and found meat. Heat spilled. Ilias's fingers went momentarily dumb. Hale rolled to his knee to finish it. Ilias let him come and gave him the iron pan, not across the head. He wasn't a murderer, but into the hand that held the box cutter. Bones popped like a tray of sugar glass under too much heat. The box cutter jumped away, angry and suddenly single. Hale cried out without permission. Below, Leora reached the end of the numbers as if finishing a service, and the crowd did the one thing she needed them to do: they looked at each other to see what they believed. Mesa stepped into the edge of the stage with a microphone and began telling people where to walk and why, her voice the kind of imperative that doesn't need volume. Hale sagged against the rail and laughed breathless. "Even if she wins tonight, knife, we already bought tomorrow." "Who?" Ilias asked, because under the blood and the work he was still an apprentice to a single hunger, to know. Hale's smile grew careful. "Ask your boss," he said. "Ask the one who pays her." "Don't," Ilias said softly, and broke Hale's balance. He didn't push him off. He wasn't a dropper. He took enough to make the man sit, zip-tied his wrists to the rail with the cable ties he'd stolen from the server closet, and took the earpiece from his ear as if harvesting something at last ripeness. "Knife," Hale whispered, leaning forward as far as the plastic would allow. "When you try to be a person, do your hands itch?" "Only when I don't wash them," Ilias said, because humor kept you human, and left him there with his laughter for company. On the office level, Mesa had opened the server room and found the injection point for the fake budget feed, a small transmitter hidden in the baseboard, wired into a port that had been labeled something boring on purpose. Leora stood with her hands on the top of the rack as if she could warm the machines with skin, watching numbers scroll back to their rightful owners. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked at a woman in a headset who had given her 2 children chicken fingers 3 hours ago and now appeared ready to chew through fiber to protect a stranger's life. "This is the one?" Leora asked. "This is the one," Mesa confirmed, yanking the transmitter out with a twist that would have impressed a longshoreman. "Pull it," Leora said. Mesa cut it clean and the screens in the ballroom sighed with relief as the demo reclaimed its throne. The donors blinked and tried to remember what they had been promised. Leora took the microphone from Mesa and spoke to the room with the quiet that had always been louder than some men's armies. "Someone tried to make you afraid," she said. "If you still are, that's reasonable. Fear is not an enemy, it's a warning. But our work isn't a stage trick. You can audit every line. We did not build this to look good. We built it because 800,000 families last year chose between heat and food." The room listened the way thirsty people listen to a faucet. Ilias came down from the catwalk with blood creeping down his sleeve in that annoyingly dramatic way wounds prefer. He arrived as Leora finished and the donors began the tentative clap that becomes commitment when they see themselves reflected in each other. She saw him. The facts wrote themselves across her face: blood, breath, a piece of brightness he'd failed to hide. She opened her mouth, to ask, to order, to worry. He gave the world's smallest shake of his head and tilted his chin toward the hallway. "Later." Please. She nodded once. Then she turned back to the room and did what leaders do, she made tomorrow sound possible. Mesa touched Ilias's elbow and pulled him into the shadow of the stairwell where the light couldn't incriminate the cut. She stripped his sleeve with a practiced motion and pressed gauze into the wound like a woman who had saved lives with both licensure and stubbornness. You're going to need 5, she said, meaning stitches. You do them? In a war? With fishing line, she said. Tonight, you get butterfly strips and my style points. He laughed and immediately regretted the use of certain muscles. Hale's upstairs, zip-tied and trying to make nihilism interesting, he said. I took his earpiece. Good. Because I like my arrests quiet, Mesa said, already radioing 2 officers with the kind of calm that could carry a building on its back. And I like my CEOs alive. And I like my pans back, he said. You can marry it later, she said, and for a second they grinned like idiots who had no business being happy. The grin died when Leora's assistant, real, vetted, eyes like a freshly wiped counter, slid into the hallway with a look people get when their phone vibrates with the worst thing. Ms. Vance, she said, breathless. The board chair is on his way up from the garage. He said he needs you in the office. Alone. Mesa's face closed like a held door. Ilias felt the world reach for a shape he'd met too many times. Which office? Ilias asked. Yours, the assistant said to Leora. He has the spare key. He sounded strange. Leora glanced at Ilias. Some recognition had built a bridge there while he'd been dismantling catwalks. She crossed it now without asking for a permit. Walk with me, Mr. Kadir, she said. Mesa moved a block. Ma'am. I want him, Leora said. Please. Mesa hesitated a fraction of a second, the difference between a reflex and a rule, then nodded. I'm at your shoulder, she said. 2 behind. They took the staff stairs, the air cooler now, as if the building had sighed out a held breath. On the landing, a faint chalky smear of flour still marked where Ilias had made the hallway honest. He stepped over it and wanted to apologize to the tile for the mess. The office-level door stood ajar. Mesa went ahead and sliced the corner with her gaze. Clear right, she whispered. Left, closed. They moved down the glass corridor, 3 shadows with intentions, and stopped at Leora's office door. It was open. Inside, a single lamp had been switched on as though someone had watched too many movies and trusted what lamps can do to guilt. The board chair, Abel Marsh, a man who had once been a sailor and now wore suits that hid the ocean, stood by the floor-to-ceiling window with his hand in his pocket like a story his tailor told. On his lapel, pinned tight and discreet, sat a tiny piece of enamel, a swallow, its wings half folded. Silver line through the belly like lightning made to lie flat. Mesa swore without sound. Ilias didn't. His body did the swear for him by putting his feet between Leora and the man as naturally as reaching for a knife you love. Abel, Leora said. She spoke his name the way people speak of whether they have loved and now do not trust. You weren't on the program. I never am, Marsh said, and the voice that had charmed senators revealed the thing that lived behind it. He turned and smiled as if this were a donor photo in a newsletter that would be printed on smooth paper and mailed to people who read their mail on pool decks. Step away from the glass, Mesa said gently. Do I win a prize? Marsh asked. You live, Mesa said. He chuckled like a healthy man. I'm here to make sure of it, actually. He took his hand out of his pocket. Empty. Ilias didn't believe pockets. He believed hands. You're late, Ilias said, because when you don't know what to say to men like this, you give them their favorite insult. Marsh's eyes rested on him with the curiosity of a man touring a new restaurant kitchen. So you're the rumor, he said. The knife that learned manners. Kitchen, Ilias corrected. Admirable, Marsh said. I admire reinvention. It's why I bought the swallow. He tapped the pin like a priest remembering a saint. It had such excellent word of mouth. You tried to buy inevitability, Leora said. You're not the first man to make that mistake. Not inevitability, Marsh said. Assurance. Investors love it. Philanthropy, too. People give more when you make their fear legible. You tried to scare them with a fake ledger, Leora said. You tried to kill them with a wafer. I tried to save them from you, Marsh said softly, and the room chilled 3 degrees. You're going to break the markets that keep them rich, my dear. They asked me to keep you honest. Honest like a planted explosive? Mesa asked. Honest like survival, Marsh said. It's amazing how much truth lives under that word. You bought Hale, Ilias said. And you licensed the bird. I bought a service, Marsh said. Like catering. Like lighting. Like stories. He looked at Ilias, and for the first time his face showed what it actually was, tired, expensive, and utterly convinced that necessity absolves all. You of all people should understand. I understand cooks, Ilias said. We don't justify burning a building because the grill won't light. Marsh sighed and took a step from the window like a man finally ready to leave a party. I'm done here, he said. Tomorrow we file the injunction. The day after that, we finish buying your board. You'll still have your pretty speeches. You just won't have power. He lifted his hand and touched the swallow pin one more time. And if you make this messy, there are other ways to keep people safe. Catastrophes can be contained. Sometimes they can, Leora said. Sometimes they launch. Marsh's jaw twitched. He glanced at Mesa as if measuring the cost of testing her. He glanced at Ilias and marked something there he'd missed when he walked in. A door opened and closed in his face, one he had not known existed. He turned to go with that smooth step rich men teach each other. Abel, Leora said. He paused, good-natured in performance. You knew my father, she said. Not a question. A man with a very clear sense of what should be permitted, Marsh said. He kept his hands cleaner than most. He forgot to wash the ones he trained. His eyes flicked to Ilias. But here you are. Still reaching. Mesa moved, crisp as a blade, badge raised, words legal and heavy pouring from her like water finding a path. Abel Marsh, you are under. He smiled, and for the first time his body betrayed him. A tremor. Small. He touched the swallow as if to steady himself. Not tonight, he said. Tonight you're busy saving a roomful of people I own. The lights cut. For one heartbeat the building remembered it was a cave with nice furniture. Emergency strips woke along the floor like pale snakes. Leora's office windows turned into mirrors that threw their own fear back at them. Ilias didn't waste the heartbeat. He stepped into the space Marsh had to take to leave and met him with a shoulder that had learned how to move men politely and irrevocably. Marsh stumbled, laughed once in surprise, and then coughed as Mesa's forearm introduced his windpipe to policy. The emergency lights stuttered and then steadied. Someone had flipped the wrong breaker on purpose. Mesa cuffed Marsh with a speed that carried a decade of training, Miranda'd him with a professional boredom that always made violent men furious, and handed him to 2 uniforms who had appeared the way good teammates do, out of nowhere and exactly on time. Marsh didn't struggle. He simply looked at Leora as if she were a painting he had once been offered at a good price and declined. You won the room, he said. We'll see if you can keep the lights on without me. Watch me, Leora said, and the line did not sound like a movie, it sounded like a ledger. They took him. The office exhaled and then seemed to realize it had been holding the breath of 100 other rooms all night. Leora leaned a knuckle on the desk. Mesa kept her eyes on the hallway as if doors had learned to grow teeth. Ilias let his shoulders drop the 3 inches he reserved for after, and the ache that followed reminded him of every fight he'd claimed and every service he'd finished. For a long breath, nobody spoke. The building hummed, trying to remember what it had been before humans asked it to witness. When Leora finally moved, it was to pick up the badge Ilias had set on her desk. She turned it in her fingers so the circle broken by a vertical stroke caught a thread of emergency light and burned. My father branded this, she said softly. On the day he shut you down. He called us in one by one, Ilias said. Told us the work had changed. That sometimes the most honest thing you can do with a knife is put it away. He burned the mark so the next person who needed to know would see it even when the light wasn't helping. And then you went and learned to make perfect tuna, she said. And bread, he said. Bread saved me. She slid the badge back to him. You can keep hiding in kitchens if you want, she said. I won't ask you to do anything you don't consent to. But if you're going to stand in my hallways and bleed for my company, I would like to put your name on a door. What would the door say? He asked, not because he cared about titles, but because titles tell you what a person imagines you could be when they are being kind. Director of Counter-Sabotage, she said. An executive chef on the letterhead, because the team won't lose you to a suit. He laughed, and this time it didn't hurt. That's 2 jobs. It's 1 life, she said. Mine needs both. So does yours. She hesitated, then let the kind win. I think my father would approve. He wanted to say 100 things, about how approval is a currency that spends itself on memory, about how knives and kitchens and fathers all try to teach you the same lesson and mostly fail because we have to learn it with our own hands. He said the honest version. I'll stay until the plates are stacked, he said. And we'll see if the pantry keeps feeling like a church. Mesa snorted. You 2 can recite vows later. We have 3 men zip-tied, a 4th in custody, and an entire donor class who needs to be escorted to cars without learning any new words. She touched her comm. I want to sweep on every entry. Run the HVAC logs. See who decided we needed that little blackout. Leora straightened, CEO again, the woman who could take a crowd by the hand and show them a bridge they'd been told didn't exist. Mesa, she said, thank you. Mesa's smile showed up for a second, small and private. Thank me by letting me hire you a real detail, she said, hooking a thumb toward Ilias. He doesn't take orders, Leora said. He takes service, Mesa said. Which is better? They moved back through the hallways they'd made honest and stood at the top of the ballroom stairs, watching as donors filed out in the practiced choreography of people who have been told everything is fine and choose to believe it because the valet is warm and the night still has dessert. Ilias felt the earpiece he'd taken from Hale hum in his pocket, a faint insect against his thigh. He frowned and pulled it out. It had no buttons, nothing to press. It simply lived, a little ear that liked to gossip. He cupped it to his own ear and turned until the building gave it a bar of reception it deserved. Static. Then a voice. Not Hale's. Warmer. Older. A woman this time. Calm like cold water. Report, she asked. Compromised, Hale's voice answered from some removed place where he had either found a friend or been given one without consent. Knife active. Vance intact. Primary narrative failed. Understood, the woman said. Proceed to Phase 2. Phase 2 is compromised, Hale said. Marsh is, he hesitated, as if glancing down at the zip tie cutting his wrists. Unavailable. Then we skip to 3, the woman said, bored with men and their little problems. 36 hours. R&D campus. Move the schedule forward. The line clicked into a hum that might have been laughter or an elevator. Leora looked at Ilias, and whatever he was thinking must have been visible enough to share. She lifted her chin the smallest degree. Ready. 36 hours, he said. R&D. She nodded. Then we sleep for 2, she said. And we cook. He smiled before he remembered not to. Bread? Truth, she said. Down on the floor, a server set a last plate of petit fours on a tray just in case someone came back for a goodbye sweet. The building cooled around them with the relief of a machine that has been allowed to stop pretending. In the distance, sirens remembered their lines and arrived for credits. Ilias looked at the badge in his hand, the circle with the broken stroke, and then at the swallow on the confiscated pin. He held them side by side like 2 ideas you compare when you're deciding who to be. One had been burned into him by a man who believed in exits. The other had been purchased by a man who believed in doors. Leora's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, and turned the screen so he could see. A text from an unknown number. No words. Just a photograph. A long, low building under winter light. A chain-link fence bright with morning. A hand-painted sign on the fence that said R&D and nothing else. And in the lower corner, a small silhouette of a bird perched on the edge of the frame, so crisp it might have been drawn on the photo by a child, a swallow, wings half folded. Beside it, a time, 5 o'clock. He felt the old weight settle where fear and hunger share a kitchen. He gave it a job to do. 5 a.m., he said. They want us tired. Then we'll be awake, Leora said. And angry, Mesa added. Hungry, Ilias said, because hunger is the lever you pull when the world tries to make you small. He put the badge on and let it lie against his sternum like a promise that didn't need witnesses. He slid the earpiece into a bag and handed it to Mesa. Burn it or feed it lies, he said. Your pick. Mesa's smile came and went like a good trick. Both, she said. The three of them stood for a moment longer at the edge of the emptied room, not as symbols or jobs or pasts that finally had names, but as people in a building that had remembered how to be a building. The night had not forgiven them. It never would. But it had given them a shape to carry into morning. Tomorrow, Leora said, the word made of grit and something merciful. We go where they think we won't. Kitchen Paxlight, Ilias said, and wiped his knife for the 1000th time, this time slower, like a prayer that had finally recalled its ending. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.